We're going to try to present that as it is a part of the literacy, and literacy is everywhere. We're going to share a little bit of our data and a data picture of our students.
There's an IEC cable right here on the backside. Just do a full 30 seconds. Yes.
And then we're going to round it out with how we're supporting literacy across our community, within our school community and our community at large. And should I keep going, or does that bother everybody? Okay. All right, so to start, because literacy is very much connected to the READ Act right now, as you know, the READ Act is an acronym for Reading to Ensure Academic Development Act. It was passed in 2023 and then reimagined in 2024. The READ Act's goal is to have every child reading at or above grade level every year, beginning in kindergarten, and to support our multilingual learners and students receiving special education services and achieving their individualized reading goals. This is something that's set forth in the READ Act, and it is certainly something that we in SoWashCo are striving for as well. You'll hear a little bit more about our official district goals when we talk about the World's Best Workforce or the CACR, Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Plan that we need to set forth, but this is certainly a goal of ours, that every child is reading at or above grade level beginning in kindergarten. We've talked a lot about professional development last year, but just to recap, for professional development, there were three, it's training and structured literacy. And so providing our teachers that foundation of understanding how kids learn to read. And so MDE put forward 3 programs, Carry All, and then Letters, both through the University of Minnesota, and then CORE, or an Online Language and Literacy Academy. You'll hear us refer to OLA and Carry All. OLA is one that we have selected for our grades 6 through 12 plus, for our teachers that we have identified as having that direct impact on literacy instruction. So, and oftentimes we think that's just our ELA teachers, but our teachers of social studies, our teachers of math, our teachers of science, all of them are going through this OLA training, which is one of MDE's approved trainings. And then the other training, CORE's Adolescent Literacy Solutions, was selected for those staff who are probably feeling like they're a little bit more removed from direct teaching of literacy. In the process of selecting with our directors of teaching and learning, when we dove into kind of the content, CORE definitely matched our 6 through 12 teachers a little bit more, and Carry All seemed to fit along with our early childhood and elementary teachers. The reason we selected the ALS is it's all synchronous instruction. The teachers come, they show up, they hear about it, and there's certainly and I think Leah's worked really hard with our vendors to make sure that, because we've gone above and beyond in our training all of our staff, that the vendors are really trying to make sure that everybody feels like they are a teacher of literacy. And so the facilitators that are working with these groups are doing a really good job of connecting it to physical education, connecting it to social work, connecting it to counseling. And Leah has really spearheaded that and working with the facilitators on that. The training is around 45 to 54 hours. It's a combination of asynchronous and synchronous. And so far we're 2 months in. We have some staff who have self-paced and gone through all of their modules. Leah has gotten a lot of positive feedback regarding how this has really helped them understand how kids learn. And I think you've heard us say, those of us that went through it last year, that it did the same for us, even though we aren't in the classroom teaching. We often get asked about funding. How are we funding all this? And why are we putting all teachers through this? And we felt like it was a really good investment of the READ Act literacy aid funds to invest in this time for our teachers. We certainly also use professional development set aside, but there is READ Act literacy aid, which was new one-time funding, and there is wide use of that for the statute. And then we also received this last summer some information regarding some additional funds for teacher compensation. And so we are in conversations with the UTSWC, the United Teachers of South Washington County Leadership, And what does that look like through an MOU? And Abby is working with their leadership on that. What does that mean for compensation, for a stipend, those types of things, and when and how is that going to be distributed? But that is in the works, and we don't have final details on that yet. So to dive in kind of the subject area that we often think about, ELA and literacy, this is how MD defines literacy. So it's all of the communication and language skills and processes people use every day to receive and send communication. We've talked about how critical literacy is to all that we do. When MDE breaks down what we want kids to know and be able to do, so in the standards, they break literacy or English language arts into reading, writing, and then listening, speaking, viewing, and exchanging ideas. And we certainly focus on these things in our ELA classes, English language arts classes. But when you look at those three strands, you can imagine how much we also use those skills in other classes. So yes, ELA is literacy, and literacy is bigger than ELA. And so while the standards are certainly focused on in our English 9 and English 10, we do understand all of these skills being infused throughout our curriculum. To talk a little bit about specifics of levels, I'm going to turn it over to the team, and Arthur's going to start out with elementary.
All right, as we look at data for elementary, we are going to talk about two different types of assessments that we use. The first one is called the MAP, and that's the Measures of Academic Progress. And that's a computerized assessment designed to measure student skills in reading. So all students will answer the same number of questions, but the difficulty changes based on how students respond. And also we'll be talking about the IRLA, and that's the Independent Reading Level Assessment, and that comes with our core ARC, American Reading Company resource. So this first slide, looking at our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, you are going to see the National RIT or ROSH unit percentage norms. So if we look at the data from 2024, from this fall, we can see that 48.1% of our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders were in the high and high average category, which means they were in the 61st percentile or higher compared to their grade level peers nationally. And you can see we have 21.9% as average and then 30% low, average, and low. When we look at this slide, though, we can see that the teachers are meeting the needs of our kids of where they are. If we look at the data from this year, we had 54.4% of our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders meet the projected growth for this fall. So, for example, if there's a 2nd grader last year that took the MAP, they took it this year. If they met their growth goal, they would be a student that would be in the yes category. And this slide is very exciting to see. The number of students meeting the growth goal has continued to go up. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about our IRLA.
Thank you, Arthur. So I want to provide a little bit of context with this slide because this is not quite as public-facing as some of the other assessments that we utilize. This is our leveling assessment. It's IRLA is what we call it, but that stands for Independent Reading Level Assessment. And this assessment is given at the beginning of the year, but it's also given at multiple points throughout the year. So the MAP assessment that Arthur was just referencing, that's a one-time assessment that we give in the fall. The IRLA is one that we do throughout the year. And specifics of that assessment in terms of how it's given, it's a one-to-one assessment. So the teacher is sitting with the student, and the student is doing a variety of things, and the teacher's taking notes on that. So for example, in our IRLA assessment, the student will read a passage, and the teacher will be listening to the student read that passage. And while the student is reading, the teacher's making notes, marking any errors that may be taking place from the student from a decoding standpoint. They're also listening to hear how fluently the student is reading. Are they pausing at the right places? Are they noticing punctuation and so forth? And then there's always a comprehension component that comes after that passage reading. And in addition to that, this assessment also takes into account, we would call them subtests, So for certain levels, those subtests might be specific to decoding a specific phonetic concept. And so the students would be reading a list of words to see how they perform on that. In the older grades, it's more of a vocabulary component where we're assessing the students' vocabulary when looking at a word. Are they able to come up with a synonym or a definition for that word? And so all those components go into then the teacher making an instructional decision that this is the level that the student is at, taking into account all those different pieces. So when we look at that, the data up there, I'm gonna draw our attention to the bottom colors because I wanna frame that for you. In our ERLA leveling system, we start at read to me, which is the purple at the far left, and then up to the very end, which is, it looks like G1, but it stands for gold. That's the gold level. That's considered almost a 12th grade level. Now, we only use ERLA in the elementary setting as of now, so I'll just kind of explain the color levels and how they're associated with the grade levels. But we would say that RTM, 1 to 3Y, 1G, and 2G would be the span of levels that we would have for kindergarten students. And then 1B to 2B is the span for first grade. 1R to 2R is the span for second grade. White level is the span for third grade. Fourth black level, fifth is the orange level. So now when it comes to the data tables, 2022, 2023, we had 63.8% of our students in K-5 that were reading at the expected end of year level. And then our previous year, 2023, 2024, we had 71.1% of those students meeting or reading at that expected grade level. And like I said before, we give the assessment at the beginning of the year, but we also give it multiple times throughout the year and also at the end of the year so we can gather that data.
All right, we are now going to talk about FastBridge Screener. So Kelly talked about the Minnesota READ Act, and part of the READ Act is districts having to give screeners. So districts were given the choice between FastBridge and Dibbles. We formed a committee. We met with representatives from both companies, and we decided as a district to go with FastBridge. And what you see on the screen are the 3 testing windows, fall, winter, and spring, and what students have to be screened on for each screening window. So we completed our fall screening on September 27th, and now teams are looking at that data to make instructional decisions to help with reading and whatnot. So you can see letter names, letter sounds, word segmenting were required for the fall and kindergarten. Nonsense words were optional. First grade word segmenting and nonsense words, CBM optional. And then second and third grade, CBM. And then for the winter, nonsense words will become part of screening for second and third grade.
All right, so you might be wondering, what are some of those subtests? And Arthur and Tom and I were part of our assessment teams at each school, since this was kind of a big year for teachers to have a lot of things on their plates, the professional development and many other things. We decided to have assessment teams that supported each site, and so that included instructional coaches, reading specialists, interventionists, principals, and then several people from the district office too would go out and screen kids. So at that kindergarten level, we're looking at letter names. That is a 1-minute timed test where there are letters in random order in front of the kids, and you're just simply marking how many letters do they know. This is looking for automaticity because random automatic naming is part of a dyslexia screener, and it tells us it has correlation to student success in reading and decoding later on. So that's letter names. Letter sounds is very similar, but the letters are in front of the kids, and they're giving us the sound that the letter makes. And again, they're doing as many sounds that they can identify within a minute. Both of these tests, we're looking for automaticity, so we're looking for students to be able to do this in 3 seconds or less. So it kind of feels, especially in kindergarten, we're like, okay, just try the next one. 1, 2, 3, try the next one. And so that's what we're looking for to see how automatic it is. This test will be given throughout the year, and so we'll be able to see, it'll be very sensitive to growth from our kinders that come in throughout the year of kindergarten. The next one we do in kindergarten is word segmenting. And this gives them 10 words. This is not timed, but we'll give them a word like top. And if I say top, what sounds do you hear? And so we're looking for them to say t, a, p. And at kindergarten, that's a lot to ask them to do. When they are first coming in, they're like, I don't know what you're saying, you know, or they'll look at me and they'll say T. It's like, but what sounds do you hear? And so the norm right there that we're looking at, if they can name any 3 sounds out of those 10 words, and mainly we're looking for that initial sound. So if they give me t, that's one point. And 3, if they get 3 points, that they're meeting the cut score. And really, if they have 0, they're kind of on track for some risk, not even high risk. So that's what we're looking at for word segmenting. Again, this goes into first grade as well too. So as the year goes on, we should be seeing that they can identify more sounds. This is all done auditorily. They're not seeing anything in front of them. So we really are focusing on that phonemic awareness, which is the foundational skill of literacy. Can they hear the sounds in the words? And we know later on with kids who struggle to read, many of these kids have a deficit in phonemic awareness where they're not hearing the sounds. So this is a really important test for us to give. And it's a test that we've given for years too. It's just a different company that we're using right now. Nonsense words is a new one for us, and this is part of a dyslexia screener. Nonsense words are words that can be sounded out phonetically if you know what sounds they make. So an example would be AK, ack. The student would say ack. This can be kind of perplexing to kids who are readers, and they're like, that doesn't say a word. So we explain to them that this is not a real word, but use what you know about sounds to sound out this word. They can either sound out this word and say ack, and that would be credit, or they could say ack. So that is the nonsense word there. And then the last one, the CBM reading. This is basically a grade level passage that they read, and we're looking for accuracy. So how many words do they get correct? And what is the rate that they read at? And again, rate has correlation to reading success down the road as well. Each student is given 3 passages at grade level, and each one is scored. They get a minute to read each one, and they repeat that 3 times a year. So they will read the same passage in the fall, the winter, and the spring, and that again will be very sensitive to growth. So those are the tests that we give right now. This is still me. All right, so what does this look like in our classroom? So as Tom and I were discussing this, I mean, there's so much going on in our classrooms. This is a very big part of our elementary school's day. So we kind of broke it down to like, what are the components that we're doing, and what does that teaching look like, and what are the structures? So when we talk about the components, obviously there's reading and writing going on. ARC, as I've mentioned to this group before, is a very integrated curriculum where they're reading to produce writing, and they're using their writing to go back to the reading and find evidence too. So they're doing both of those things every single day. And then foundational skills is very important in our K2 program, or our K2 grades specifically. This includes, for kindergarten and first grade, an interactive morning message where there is a very targeted skill for the day, and the teacher has a message up on a whiteboard or on chart paper, and the class is completing that together, often and including skills that they're working on that day in the literacy block. We also have new this year, we have decodable anthologies. So these are books that have decodable words that are aligned to the lesson that they are teaching with the word work. So these will be opportunities for a whole class to practice the skill for the day, the words that they're working on, and also for small groups to revisit later on. And then finally, word work books. So the kindergarten and first grade has specific word work books that they're doing as they're learning these decodable words. The structures that are in place, whole class instruction, and a key part of this is that we're using grade level texts and we're focusing on grade level standards. So all of our kids are getting grade level standards. This is important because while all kids are not reading at grade level, if we continue to hold kids away from grade level work, that gap is only going to grow. So core instruction is at grade level for all students. But there has to be times for differentiation. So there is lab time for reading and writing practice. This is when kids will meet with teachers for reteaching or for additional skill work, but also time for them to practice, because kids don't learn just by us telling them things. They need time to synthesize and practice work in their own text. So if they're not meeting with the teacher, they're at their desk and they know specifically their power goals that they're working on, and they're applying that in their own reading and writing. The Equitable Conference is a schedule that the teacher has that spans 2 weeks that talks about which groups they're meeting with which days, and they follow that. And then again, that small group instruction where we're using we have something called the toolkits, and those have very specific, systematic and explicit lessons that reteach part of the core, or they might go back. So as Tom talked about with like the 2R readers, that being a second grade approximately level, if we have third graders in there, but they have some gaps in phonics, we can go back to that 2R toolkit, pull up the lessons that they need, and the teacher will do that in small group as well. And I think that's about it. Anything else I missed, T-Ross?
No, I think you covered everything, Leah, but the only thing I wanted to mention was to link it back to the ERLA assessment that I was talking about previously. Leah mentioned, I think, the power goal component. Many times when we're giving the ERLA assessment, teachers will have the opportunity to see what that next teaching move or instructional component would be needed to progress them forward. We oftentimes gather that from doing the ERLA assessment. And that power goal oftentimes will drive that small group instruction or that one-on-one conferring, conferencing with the students.
And as Tom mentioned, we do the ERLA several times a year, but we don't have set windows. And this could be because a student might be in one of those foundational skills level, and sometimes they move through those skills pretty quickly, and sometimes they need a little bit longer. So if we think a student has met the power goals and kind of the criteria for that level, we give them another cold read, we look at those subtests, and then if they meet the criteria to exit, they're on to the next level. So it's always an ongoing process to see what the kids need, and it's very responsive to the students, but it's also a very, very structured scope and sequence of what skills the kids need to be successful readers.
Also, in our elementary classrooms, we are seeing information from our CARE training that Kelly mentioned earlier. So far, we've gone through 2 modules. Module 1 was the multi-tiered systems of support, assessment, and literacy development, and Module 2 is instructional considerations for literacy educators. So in that Module 2, looking at what does explicit instruction look like. We know for structured literacy, we have to have systematic and explicit instruction. So in Module 2, we're learning about what that looks like. And also what's next in elementary, all of this data that we've shared with you, it's really nice. Teams are using that in their professional learning communities, our PLCs, and we're also seeing these in our school improvement plans and to make instructional decisions that meets the needs of students. And then also classroom practice, as I mentioned in the previous slide, implementing the strategies from the CARE literacy training into the classroom practice. All right, and so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mark.
Thanks, Arthur. Good evening, everybody. I have the pleasure of reporting on some achievement data in reading at the secondary level, and we purposely set this up so it'd be symmetrical with the elementary, although we have a little bit less data when it comes to the ERLA and the more formative day-to-day classroom data than we do at the elementary level, but that'll be our work this year, is to continue to build out that data picture. So Arthur did a nice job of explaining the map and what this snapshot represents. But at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level, you'll notice here 45.9% of our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders scored in that 61st percentile and higher as compared to their same age peers across the nation. And so some trend data there that we are keeping an eye on. And if we advance the slide and look similarly that we did at the elementary level, we can see that 53.7% of our students hit their growth targets as identified in the previous year's growth benchmarks. So obviously that's a trend that we'd like to see continue to increase, and we have some more work to do there, but certainly we like to see those bars moving up.
So when we talk about ELA in the secondary classrooms, this slide specifically talks about what it looks like in the English language arts classroom. And last year we completed a scope and sequence for the district for 6th through 12th grade. So I met with every teacher from every grade level 3 full days during the year last year. And then at the end of the year we had one kind of vertical alignment day where there was 1 teacher per grade level per school where we kind of finalized some things. We're also meeting a couple half days this year just to continue this work to see what support is needed. These things are based on practices that we have developed for common practices across the district based on the standards and what we want to see for our students receive, the instruction we want them to see receiving in our district. So when it comes to reading, Instruction includes book clubs, and book clubs are kind of like, you think of a book club where, you know, Dana and I might be reading different books, but the students have choice in that. There's a lot of research that talks about choice, increasing engagement for students, and engagement in turn often impacts achievement. And this is something that's written into the Minnesota state standards as well. But we know that that needs to be balanced with whole class novels, and there's a time and a place for whole class novel reading and instruction. It's a common shared experience. It allows for very clear teaching points, so that's how instruction is balanced there. Texts, we have purchased a lot of texts this year, offering multiple perspectives, which again is called out in the standards, including Dakota and Anishinaabe texts. One thing that I'm really excited about, last year we got received about 300 books from the Mdewakanton Sioux, Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux tribe through an initiative of theirs where we got a book called Voices from Pashutazizi. And so those books all are at the high school in their book rooms that they can use to meet the standards that address Dakota and Anishinaabe people. And then this year we received about 100 copies of Dr. Anton Troyer's new young adult version of Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask. And so we are expecting about another 100 or so books coming from MDE as well. So those will be books placed into our middle school book rooms as well. So really increasing the kinds of books that we have to meet the standards for our students. Core instruction, again, like I mentioned for elementary, is really important for it to be grade level text, while also differentiated for needs. So sometimes there might be an opportunity for students to have text at different level, but again, the core instruction, all students are receiving instruction using grade level text. And then another thing is independent reading time happens on a regular basis, and we had a really rich conversation with teachers about this today and what that looks like and how students are doing with that. The 6th grade teachers today reported that the students have a lot of reading stamina, and I have to attribute this to the work that our elementary teachers have been doing with their independent reading time, 30 minutes a day. So that's what's happening in reading. For that kind of listening, speaking, viewing, and exchanging ideas, we have at the minimum of 3 Socratic seminars or shared inquiry discussions in every ELA class a year. And these are where students would read a common text and they'd prepare for it in advance, thinking about questions, annotating the text, coming with their own thoughts and ideas. But then that discussion is where they are listening to their peers before they speak. They are building on each other's ideas. They are challenging each other's idea in a respectful manner, and they're working through this. And then at the end, they reflect upon, is their answer the same as it was when they began their reflections. For writing, there are 4 genres called out: informational writing, argument, and persuasive, and those are separated. They used to be kind of one. And then creative and narrative writing as well. There is a focus on doing more writing more frequently, but we also know that extended writing, so doing kind of those more formal papers, research papers, maybe writing a creative story, are also important. So the requirement is that there are at least 2 extended pieces of writing, or at least 2 of those in those 2 genres during the year. And then finally, the last one, there used to be a language strand where it's kind of a separate grammar strand, and MDE kind of embed that into the writing strand this year. And so we use a tool called No Red Ink that embeds grammar within writing instruction and also includes some reading as well. So that is what it looks like there. Across the content areas though, there used to be an appendix to the MDE ELA standards that had like reading for the social studies and science arts. And that has been removed, and they have embedded all of those kind of literacy type standards into the new science standards and the new social studies standards. So if you take a look at those, they will have a lot of literacy-based kinds of thinking, things like this that you'll see in there. So that is what we're doing in the secondary classrooms.
Thank you, Leah. And as a former English teacher and married to an English teacher, I'm really excited to see the intentional work done on these skills, because whether you're talking about college ready or career ready or just civic life in the community, these are really important skills to develop in the ELA environment. Just this last slide, what's next at secondary level? The READ Act, we are awaiting a screener at the secondary level and guidance from MDE on that, and they will also be providing some grade level achievement benchmarks to guide districts. So we'll wait on that piece as part of the READ Act. And then we just really need to build out this data picture for our secondary schools. So we have an opportunity, for example, to look in 25-26 at adding a pre-ACT for 8th grade, which will be having another data point that will illuminate where students are at in terms of the reading comprehension and the skills that Leah identified.
All right, so to round us out, we're going to talk a little bit about next steps. We were presenting, and Cheryl proactively just came. I hear you say SoWashCo literacy in the community, and let's talk about what that means. So it's been awesome to have the conversations with her, so I'm going to let her kick it off for us.
Thanks, Kelly. So one of the ways we can help our children achieve their literacy goals is to ensure that they have access to books. And so our schoolie bus has been a registered free little library since 2018. So wherever kids see the bus, they can get free books. Those have all been donated through our community, and we've given out thousands of books over the last 6 years. And then more recently, SoWashCo Cares entered into a partnership with the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. Have you heard about that program? So it was actually brought to us through our ECFV Advisory Council parents. One of them had it in their old community and was like, we would love to bring this here. So we have just signed the partnership with the program, and we're going to pilot it in Newport. And so we'll be working with Newport Elementary and our Newport Community Library, as well as businesses and churches and daycares in the community to enroll as many students as possible. So basically, every student can get a book mailed to their house every month until they turn 5 years old, at no cost to them. The only cost of the program is the postage, and so SoWashCo Cares will be fundraising for that. So some of the other ideas that we have been brainstorming, these are in the early planning stages. Intergenerational reading buddies, we're already working with DARTs, who are tutors in some of our schools. And then the guest reader program to kindergartners, we have several people lined up waiting to read to the kindergarten cuties. The Avid Middle School Pen Pal program, we love working with our Avid students. We're already through SoWashCo Cares and Kids Club have a program where we work with our middle school students and high school students. And then we'll continue to work with our business community to support literacy. We have great partners. Barnes & Nobles have donated, really over the last 3 years, probably over 1,000 books to our programs.
And then also some intentional outreach for our families. So a SoWashCo Family Academy, you can see the dates there, Tuesday, December 10th and Tuesday, April 8th, where really we provide our families. I don't know if any of you were here, like when Leah was kind of talking what all of these are, it's like, I could support that at home. I could make sure that my child is sounding out letters. And so some tips and strategies to help at home, but also diving a little bit more into what is happening in their child's classrooms regarding ELA and literacy. So we are excited to do the December 10th session and the April 8th session for our families, and we will work with our communications department to make sure that the word gets out. What questions might you have?
So I have a question. I know you said that generally the kids are working at what grade level they're in rather than what level they're at. And maybe this is a question for Erin. Is that true with special ed too? Say you have a kid that's a 10th grader that's reading at like a 2nd grade level. Are you incorporating things from that 2nd grade level, or how does that work?
Great question. So I think we maybe could clarify a little bit more about what the conferencing is and what the toolkits are used for. But kind of going back to the fundamental purpose of special education, it's always about making progress in the grade level curriculum. So our IEP goals are what we're targeting when we pull kids away from a class, right, and do that really drill down discrete skill development to kind of close some of those gaps so that they can better access their experience in the grade level class. At the same time, second grade level to 10th grade demand is pretty tricky, right? And so we wouldn't typically at high school see that be an experience for a student. We have highly specialized classes for students that have that great of a gap. But circling back to the elementary, we are constantly working on improving our practices around scheduling and being really intentional with when we pull kids away from the grade level experience so that we're maximizing the discrete skill development with the exposure and access to the grade level experience. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Would
We're
that be the?
also, I just would love to share that we're exploring some tools for how we support assessing literacy for our students who experience hearing loss. That's an area too that we're working closely on.
Would that be the same thing then for kids that are coming to our country that are just learning English? They would still go with
Absolutely.
whatever grade they're coming in at?
Yes, the goal is always going to be to get to grade level, but we have that reasonableness standard about how much acceleration can occur and what's developmentally appropriate. I think the fundamental kind of piece is to remember that it is always essential for kids to have access and exposure to their grade level experience regardless of what extra services they're entitled to.
Yeah, I think the biggest focus there too, like Erin said it so eloquently, is that we're not removing kids from core instruction during grade level instruction time to get any extra services. So we've been really intentional about that scheduling. But of course, within reason, we're meeting kids' needs where they're at.
Can I have some clarifying questions on the different assessments kids are going to have? So looking at the elementary MAP test scores, right? So, hold on, Lee's got to scroll back. So looking at that, we have, roughly 70% of kids who are either average or high average in that. And so is average the same as proficient, or is average just like they are statistically similar to the average in the US?
That one is a nationally normed test, and so it's not going to equate exactly, average will not equate exactly to like a meets on the MCA. There is a correlation score that we have, so we are looking for a RIT score that does give us a predictor of whether or not they will be proficient on the MCAs. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Like how they
so I guess
correlate?
my question is, so we see here that like there's 30% of kids who are low average or low, and then when we look at our MCA scores, it's more than 30% who are not proficient. And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what is the bridge between those two numbers, and how should families or how should we be thinking about those?
Yeah, and I don't know what the number is exactly. I feel like it's usually around like the 53rd percentile. That kind of is that cut score. Do you guys know? Does anybody know what that cut score usually ends up at, is percentile-wise from the MAP that is a predictor of proficiency for the MCA?
Yeah, I don't. And I think
that
that was also why we thought it was important for you to see this whole picture of kids and other data pieces, because we do know that that is our accountability test, and we do know that that is important. I think the more we're able to make those database decisions in the classroom in time with data like the IRLA, with data like MAP, and our teachers are getting really good at using it. And so it is driving the instruction, which, to your point, I think will naturally, we're hoping, drive up that MCA score. But that's one child on one day, whereas these tests are multiple times and we're gathering this data. So to correlate them, we use them to predict, but they really caution you to correlate. Like, Leah scored blank, so she should score blank. We use it to predict. We don't use it to say she should, if that makes sense. We use it to predict where we need to teach and where we need to use gaps or where we need to fill gaps. But they don't turn it into a Z-score, for example. Like they don't have a Z-score between MAP and MCAs.
Okay.
So that they could easily be compared.
Okay, and so when we're looking at then, so a kid takes a MAP, so they're taking the MAP once a year, correct? And they take it in the fall? No, they take the MAP multiple times a year.
Fall and spring in the middle school.
And just in the fall and elementary.
And just in the fall and elementary. Is MAP testing new then at the middle school, or was I just an oblivious middle school parent?
It's newer. 6th and 7th grade are in year 3.
We've had it once a year for middle school, as long as I've been here. I think it's new, and it was in 8th grade, and then it wasn't, and it's back in 8th grade now.
Okay.
Okay. And so when we look at then, like, are these kids meeting their projected growth, right? So we've got, a little over 50% of kids last year met their projected growth for third, fourth, and fifth grade. How is that projected growth determined, and what is the how similar is the projected growth for an average student compared to what proficiency should be for that student in that grade?
So to clarify a few of those pieces, you're right, the projected growth that a student is supposed to make will somewhat be determined on where they scored the previous year. And so theoretically, if you have a lower score that comes in, you're going to have to grow more to meet that growth. The challenge though becomes is that not necessarily meeting that growth is necessarily going to put you in to the classification where you would be predicted to meet. So it's almost, for some of our students and teachers, the challenge would be to not only grow those students by almost 10, 12 points for some of our students, depending on where they're scoring, but the challenge is also to try to bring them even more farther than that. So to answer the question you had about where they score and how much they have to grow, that is determined where they scored the previous year.
And that's a calculation by MAP. The company does that, some algorithm that it comes up with the growth goal for each. So it just populates what the growth goal is for each student.
I think the other is true as well. You could have a child that didn't meet their growth goal and exceeds on the MCA.
Right. So we're always looking for meeting their growth goal. We want even our highest kids to still grow a full year. Everybody deserves to grow a full year or more in our schools, but we also want them to, be proficient in whatever subject area it is.
Okay. And so then you said that this is basically like an algorithm that the MAP company has. Do we have any influence or any insight into what drives that algorithm? Like, do we know, is it, is what drives the algorithm's growth the same things that are important to us as a district?
Yeah, I think it's like Tom said, the lower they are, they want them to grow a little bit more, but that's because it's going to stretch them a little bit more. If you're below a cut score or below grade level for that, it's going to want you to grow a little bit more, but it's always something like within reason, I think. I can't speak to exactly how it's calculated. It's a technical thing. I can certainly get more information on that.
I would just say that within every score, when we're talking about the MAP test, there are skills and strategies that students need to know and be able to do. And so what our teachers are looking at is where's that next band, where's that next number, what skills do they have to acquire? So within every band of scores, there are skills and strategies that students need to learn and be able to do in order to adequately move up.
And the MAP score will also has strands. It has vocabulary, narrative, and informational. And those are strands that we obviously are attending to throughout the year. Okay. So we can sometimes be mindful of if there is a situation where a student is showing very low score in vocabulary, for example, we can try to match that with the other data that we're collecting and make a plan from there.
And to Julie's point, when you look at a student profile, you'll get a RIT score for, let's say, reading, but when you look at that score, it will say, Arthur, based on his RIT score, will need this to meet his growth goal throughout the year. So teachers have that ability to look at the score and then to see exactly what it is they need to do to help Arthur or whoever the student is grow to that next level.
MAP and ERLA give us great teaching points, so like things that students can do right now and things that they need to work to do next, whereas MCAs give us more of a system view of how our students are doing. So, and it compares the students against grade level standards, so it's kind of that finite cap, whereas MAP and ERLA have no cap.
Okay. So those are the students basically then, the students are growing against themselves, not necessarily growing against anyone else within their cohort.
Yep, the MAP score it starts on a scale in second grade when they start taking it here, and there is no ceiling to it. So we should see growth every single time they take it.
And the nice thing about a RIT score is a 212 is a 212 no matter what student. So you could have a second grader that gets a 212, or you could have an 8th grader that gets a 212, and it means
it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's really nice when you have 8th graders, if they've been in our system since second grade, you can see year over year how they have done.
What their numbers are doing.
Yep.
Okay. And then for the ERLA, like how many times, so I know you said that they're not given on any specific cadence, right? So what is the gate that means that we're going to be doing another ERLA assessment for a specific child?
Yeah, it's really based on the child. So if I am a kindergartner, as Leah said before, these younger grades, like the yellow, green, and blue levels, kids are going through those pretty quickly. So if I'm a teacher and Mark is my student and he's in 1G, each level has entry and exit requirements. And so as a teacher, I'm like, wow, Mark is really, he has these exit requirements for 1G, so I'm gonna try a cold read for 2G to see if he fits there. And so teachers, it's really based on the needs of the students. And so you might have those students that are doing really well. They might not have the ERLA as much as a student that is progressing through the levels faster. So it's really based on an individual student need.
I would say though too that we do give it at the beginning of the year, and then we do give it at the end of the year. So there are two kind of guideposts for us to see where they're at coming in and to mark where they're at the end of the year.
And then the expectation is that where they at the end of the year, they're going to be pretty similar. Like we're not expecting, or we have calculated in there what the slide would be over the summer for the following fall then? Or we assume that
They'll
there's...
give it away, they'll give it right away again during those assessment days.
Okay.
So we will kind of.
Like the,
Yep,
okay.
correct.
And then, so for the kids, like, so say you've got like, there are a couple readers who are like just, like they come into kindergarten knowing how to read, right? So how do they fit into this because they've already hit those benchmarks? Like what do we do for those kinds of students?
Correct, yeah, and I think that goes back to some of the structures that we were talking about before within the literacy block. The one nice thing about the ERLA assessment is that it does provide not only the student to see what they can do at that particular level, but then also it can provide teaching points for the teacher to instruct to get them to move beyond. And so to answer your question more specifically, I think the teacher would be able to provide power goals for those groups of students and work with those individual students during their equitable conference schedule. Okay. They would still be receiving the whole group instruction component, but just like how we would differentiate for a student who maybe is struggling, the intention would be that they would differentiate for the students who are also above and beyond that particular level.
Okay. And then when you're talking about the secondary stuff, is that primarily like a middle school thing because of how different the high school classes are from each other and like?
It's, we have a common practices document for middle school and for high school. That's pretty similar.
Okay. We just haven't we don't give the MAP test at the high school, correct?
We do not right now.
That's good, because I was going to feel like a really bad parent if I hadn't realized that. And so you had mentioned at the beginning that like these new standards are set in statute, like for reading and writing and stuff. So is that going to be reflected then on the MCAs? Like, do the MCAs currently have a writing component?
The MCAs are only a reading test. So while there are 3 strands for ELA, we only test the reading one. I think the last time they did a writing test was probably back in 2008, 9, 10, something like that.
Oh, okay.
So there is no writing test. We just have the math, the reading, and the science.
Okay. And then when you were talking about this, I swear this is my last question, with because I know everyone wants to be done. You were talking about secondary, how there's a lot of choice for kids to read versus whole class reading. And so I know that, I just read an article in maybe the Wall Street Journal or something that talks about like, there's been, because of school testing and informational text, this move away from kids reading whole books as opposed to shorter excerpts. So do we have anything around like how they have to read, like what it is that they have to read, what kind of texts are embedded into this literacy process?
Great question. So the standards are more informational based in ELA, which for many of our teachers is a shift because they were like trained to be literature teachers, and ELA at the secondary level is no longer a literature class. It's truly an English language arts class. But when I talk about book clubs at middle school and high school, there are 2 to 3 book clubs required a year that would involve some sort of choice, and that could even be 2 or 3 different titles, but those have to be whole pieces of text. So we're not going to say like, we're going to read 2 articles and call that a book club. So we, just like the extended writing piece, we do want kids to read an entire text to see the arc of a story or to see follow an informational text all the way through.
I would add, this is also where you see literacy show up in other courses as well. So for example, Newsella which would probably be kind of what you're referring to, is used in social studies.
In all of our content areas. That's a resource that we have at the middle school level, Newsella. It offers text in all the content areas. And Oltman, for example, did a great job as part of their SIP plan last year, where every teacher was using it on a monthly basis, and they saw really great gains with their scores last year. So that would be an example where we're reading content articles in classes, but maybe not a whole text.
Do we have requirements around like full texts in middle school or high school? Like you have to read one full text per try or something like that?
Yep, so our common practices, we talk about 2 to 3 book clubs at a minimum through the year, and then 1 to 2 an option of 1 to 2 whole class novels. Some teachers don't do a whole class novel, some might do 1 or 2 a year. So yeah, we are looking at least 1 or 2 whole class texts per trimester.
And then how does this fit in, okay, I lied when I said that was my last question. How does this fit in with then classes that are like externally normed? Like if you're taking an IB literature class or an AP literature class or something like that, how do we overlay our standards over what these external organizations expect us to accomplish?
We have to follow the syllabi for those CIS courses to stay accredited in AP and any of those as well, and IB as well. So we'd have to kind of use that as kind of the upper end of what we are doing.
I think we do make an assumption that the standards for ELA are embedded within their standards. So I would say that's a pretty good assumption as well.
Okay, I'm done.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to 4.2, and that is board governance plan, and that is presented by me. So we do a board 3-year governance plan. This current one was for 2023 to 24, going to 25 to 26. So we have the proposed for 2024 to 2025. There are a few items that are highlighted in yellow, are ones that we did not do last, were all these ones we didn't? Dana, were the ones highlighted in yellow ones we didn't complete? Because the live stream of the workshop in business we did do, but the rest of them we didn't, so that's why I was, did that just accidentally get?
The 23 to 24 last year are in the very back of it. Down below.
Right.
Those were 23 and 24, and those were marked in red.
Okay. So some of the items that we had talked about doing but had not yet. So we did at one point, we were doing the annual board self-evaluations. I know we had done one 2 years ago. It was done, but then there was not discussion around it. So then last year it wasn't done at all, and we did not do it this year. So that is something that we would want to look at. Do we want to continue, or do we want to remove it off of here? The board professional development, we do that. The live stream of the workshops and business meetings, that is something that we did add to continue, or to add in our workshops, and we did do that. And then the board listening sessions, we had talked about doing the board listening sessions instead of comments to the board. So that is still on there if that is something we want to consider. I know that the consideration was that we would have one board meeting a month. We'd have up to 3 board members that would show up 30 minutes ahead of time if there were people signed up. So it would be the same thing where they would have to sign up, and it could be more of a discussion with the person rather than just them speaking to us and we not comment. And then the other thing was the staff listening sessions was another thing that we had on there that we had not done. So any comments or discussion on those items?
I have only one thing, but it's actually, so a couple years ago when I went to the National School Board meeting, I attended one session about what school boards can do that has direct influence on student outcomes. And apparently, self-evaluations are one thing that boards do that leads to improved student outcomes. So this was some research done, I think, by the Texas School Board Association, if I remember correctly. And so I would then support, just on the face of it, being better, for, ostensibly better for students. I think we should try to continue doing self-evaluations. I do think, though, to your point, when you said we never discussed it, like the taking of the evaluation is not the job, right? It's the discussion and then the outcomes and what the accomplishments as a result of the evaluation is what needs to be part of this, and that's what's actually leading to the better student outcomes.
Okay, and I'm totally fine with doing the self-evaluations. I think we should look at finding one that better fits our needs. I don't think the last one that we did really, it was just a couple of questions and it really didn't.
I don't even remember the last one we did, right?
It wasn't. So I will look into finding.
But I do think, like, if we do do it, I do think having then like a focused discussion afterward would be, that's what's the critical thing.
Yeah. Any other?
I agree with Simi, so I think it's important for student outcomes and also for us to be able to measure our growth as a board. I did bring an example of our 916 one, if you want to take a look at
I
that too.
didn't care for that one either when I was on it.
Well, it was actually changed and dropped.
Oh,
since we've
was
been
it?
on
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, then,
you
yeah,
wanted
if
to
you
take a look
could
at that
send
one,
me
But I think it's important.
yeah, yes, I agree. Any other things that we want to adjust, remove?
So one question about the board listening sessions, I feel like we talked about them and we said no to them at some point because of some reason, but I cannot remember what the discussion was around those. And so I'm hoping that, and I'm just looking at you because I feel like you know, might know.
I know we had talked about doing them when we had, instead of doing them all the time, doing them when we had something large that we were considering.
Oh, like a referendum
Yeah,
or something?
wasn't-
Okay.
Yeah, when we had a referendum or boundaries or budget or negotiations, so even if, like, when we had teacher negotiations previously, we could have one so that they could come in and talk to us, or we could even, if parents had concerns about, things, bond elections, that kind of thing. So we could do it and just put it in there that we would do it for special circumstances, where we would want to be able to have a discussion rather than just, because sometimes it feels very informal when we have a teacher come up and they're sharing all of this and we just have to say, okay, thank you.
Right.
We can't actually have a conversation with them. So that would be my suggestion, or if we could add them, just where it says here, like, special board listening opportunities as needed.
I mean, you know how, like, when we had the bond, we had the different, discussions and listening sessions where the board came. I mean, that could be something where, we just hung out afterwards and, if we wanted to hear other input or talk about things rather than having additional.
But we get to, the problem with those is if all of us were there, it becomes an open meeting.
Right, we wouldn't be able to do that.
We have to sign up.
Right, which I don't want to discourage any board members from ever showing up to those, that's why. And plus, if you already have been there for 2 hours, are you going to stick around for another 30 minutes to have it? So that's why I would like to have them for a set time. I mean, people would still have to sign up, so if nobody signed up, none of us would have to show up for it. Just as another opportunity, because those public meetings are really just, they're not the time for that. That would be my only suggestion, is doing them when we have things like that, so we can actually have those conversations.
And so so one of the things I think would be helpful is, if we structure them, is that I know sometimes when we get feedback back from the community, sometimes it's not, how do I want to say this? Because we don't decide the way that community members may suggest we decide they think they have not been heard, or they think that we're not, you know, when really there's other factors involved, right? And so that's what I like about the discussion, is that you can say, okay,
Right.
but there's X, Y, and Z that are also part of this, right? But I also want to make sure that community members don't leave these listening sessions feeling like that they have no influence into the process, or that they haven't been heard or something like that. Like, because I feel like that would be very frustrating if I were a community member and I come talk to the board, and then the board is like, oh, okay, well, thank you for spending half an hour talking to me about this thing that's very important to you, and now I'm not gonna do anything.
And I think that's the same thing that happens though when we have the comments to the board, because they stand up there, they talk for 3 minutes, and then they leave, and I would say, I mean, how many would you say that you've actually, because I know it does say that we may ask the superintendent, but how many would you say that you've actually responded?
You know, I don't recall over the last year, we probably had 15 comments to the board maybe, and perhaps 2 to 3.
So I think they could feel more heard if we're actually telling them, I understand, you know, and if it is a subject, we could have talking points so that we're not saying, oh yeah, I'll vote your way, when, you know, I mean, because that's really not.
Right, that's not what we're saying.
The point of it, but I just feel like when we talk about the community not being heard, this would be a way that they could actually.
Feel like they
Feel
were
like-
more engaged in the,
Yes.
more part of the process.
Right. I don't know that we have anything coming up.
Yeah, do we
that
have
this would
anything,
even
like-
be something that we'd have to.
Is there even anything on the horizon, right? Like,
I think the biggest things are literacy and construction, right? So pick one of those
I guess
topics.
my question would be, how do we determine, or who determines what rises to the level of where we're going to have these sessions?
Well, yeah, and that's what we'd have to.
Is that something that we
Yeah.
take a vote on? I don't.
So we would pick, like, there's always those hot topics that we know because the boardroom gets filled when it shows up on the agenda. So, I mean, we could say it's, you know, if we're going to be changing boundaries, if we're going to be making cuts, if we're going to be, I'm trying to think of any other.
going out, asking taxpayers to
Yeah,
fund
if
something.
we're going to have ballot initiatives, anything like that, we could say would rise to that.
Because then there also, I mean, to your point about, though, anything that fills a boardroom, there are many things that are temporary that fill a boardroom that aren't necessarily, like, you know, like I remember, I mean, I don't even remember what the topic was, but I came one year because my kid was supposed to be here. This is before I was on the board, and there was like some athletic team had a bunch of parents in here because they were upset about something. I don't remember exactly what it was, and so I don't know that would necessarily be the kind of thing that is so, the long-term ramifications are such that we would do a listening session, but they absolutely filled the room, right? So how would we want to?
But maybe that would actually be something that we would want to, because then we could hear from parents on their points. I mean, and maybe that's something where when Dana starts getting a lot of, because you get the people that want to come and speak. I mean, maybe if Dana's getting, you know, 10, or I don't know that 10 would be, but, you know, she's getting like 15, 20 requests for the same topic, maybe that's when we would consider doing something. Like, we could set a threshold where if enough people.
I think you would have to, I think that's a tricky issue, because I think if you have a situation where somebody is allowed to partake in a listening session and somebody else isn't, it makes that person feel as if, well, the issue that I'm speaking about is not as important, and who has decided that?
Which is why I wanted them for I wanted one a month. When I initially brought it forward, is I wanted one a month so that something like that didn't happen, because.
To me, it has to be an all or nothing.
Right, and that was kind of where I was, because I feel like they are just talking at us, and we shake our head and we nod and we say thank you for coming, and they never know if anything, you know. I mean, nothing ever came about any of them, most of them, or did we put something on the agenda because of something they said, but maybe they weren't paying attention after that and they don't even know. So,
I think one thing we've tried to do is when we think about our process, whether we're talking about budget or boundary, is that we try to make sure that there's opportunities for board members to engage and sit in on presentations, like I think about budget and boundaries and even construction and referendum, for you to be able to be at meetings to hear what groups of people and parents are saying. And so while not a listening session just pulled out and board versus people coming from the community, we try to, in our processes, build in opportunities for board members to be around community members listening. I think really what I hear you talking about more are actually engagement sessions. So you're not just listening, you're also kind of responding. And so I think that's maybe the question for the board is, do you want to have engagement sessions? Because it sounds like that would be more of a back and forth.
And so I agree with you, Eric. I think if we do approach this, we either do it every month, like once a month or whatever it is, right? But we do it on a very specific cadence, or we just don't do it. Because I do think like, the other thing is that you get, you know, I also don't, you know, if you've got like 10 people coming to talk about why, like, we shouldn't have water in the schools or whatever, and then like all the pro-water people don't know about it, you know, then you get like, I also want to make sure that everybody knows that there's an opportunity to come and that there's an opportunity to revisit things. Because if you're like, you know, oh, October is the month we're talking about water, and then you learn about it late and it's November, then what do, you know? So I mean, I'm with you. I think, I don't know, maybe we just experiment. Maybe 2024, 5? What's next year?
yeah, and
5?
I mean, and maybe that's something that we look at and we put both options out there on the website. Do you want to come to a 30-minute prior to talk to up to 3 board members? Or and we have them both and see it, because we did them before, and what happened was we started where we didn't have them sign up. So at first people were coming, and then all of a sudden we'd be sitting here for like 30 minutes. No, I think we did an hour. Wasn't it? Was it 30?
I think it was only 30 minutes.
Was it 30? It seemed like a really long time when you're sitting here and nobody's
When
showing up.
nobody was there.
And so we did like 3, I think maybe 3, and then we just stopped.
Didn't you say you got the same people that would come all the time too?
No, it wasn't the same people. It was different, but it was the same topics. Okay. Just different people.
And
were
I
showing
would
up.
offer the board, what data do you have or have you received that would say that listening sessions are a strategy or something that the board needs to engage in? So have any of you received data that you haven't been accessible, you haven't had opportunities for public comment? So what data do you have that say that this would be a strategy that the board would utilize in terms of transparency or communication?
So I do think one of the things to that is that I think a lot of people, you know, if you do come to a meeting and you do see comments to the board, what you see is that people speak to us and that we don't respond. And if you are not the kind of person who feels like, maybe you're just like, this is not something that I want to bother a board member about over an email, or I don't want to call them, but this is something that is important enough to me that I would want to make a comment to the board and hear back from them, you know, or I can go down and I can, you know, sit and listen to them. You know, I mean, I think it may be just another avenue for people to feel, who are looking for a way to engage with us, to feel comfortable. I mean, I do think we should maybe just offer lots of different paths for people to meet us, right? And, you know, there are some people who are going to want to have a face-to-face conversation, and there are some people who are going to want to email us, and then there's, you know, a lot of people who just don't want to talk to us at all, right? And so we just need to be accessible to all of them in as well as we can. So that would be why I would say, like, yeah, we don't have data that says that we're not accessible, but we conversely also don't have data that says that we're accessible the way people want us to be accessible.
So, some people, at least this is my thought, some people, you know, like to speak their mind, get things off of their chest, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. Some people would like to do that and then be responded to. Is it possible to, you know, offer the option when people sign up for these things to say, yeah, I would like a response from the superintendent, from the board, or I'm not interested in that. I would just like to, you know, say my 2 cents and move on.
Yeah, we could try that first.
And I think
Of the comments The public
Yeah.
comments?
The actual public
And,
comments.
you know, I guess maybe to gauge, you know, their interest in do they want to have a dialogue about this or not? Because some people would be interested in that, some just wouldn't.
Just want to, vent, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would feel, frankly, in a listening session or an engagement session, however you want to put it, you know, I might feel a little ill-prepared and
Right.
just be blindsided by somebody coming in here with a
Yep.
particular issue I know nothing about.
Right.
So you're kind of leaving us vulnerable, I think, in that
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah, I like that. I like giving them the option of having, and because it gives them, like you said, it gives them the option that they can hear. And I don't know how comfortable I mean, this would be up to you, but I mean, could it even be a response whereas they want you to actually, I mean, if we're only talking about 15 a year, is it something that you could do a phone call if that's what they were asking for versus an email, or if they wanted an email or a phone?
I don't have a problem following up with people and having conversations about their public comment. I mean, many times it may not be an answer or it may not be a response they want to hear,
Right.
but it's certainly acknowledged that, yes, we heard them.
And I mean, furthermore, as you said, okay, so last year, for example, we had 15 people sign up for public comment. If hypothetically half of those would like a
Right,
response.
exactly.
We're talking about 7, 8, whatever. Perhaps before you responded, you know, we have monthly meetings with you to discuss things, you know, if there was somebody who would like a response, perhaps that's something that could be brought up during those meetings, at least to, you know, discuss the
Yep.
issue with the board members, maybe get some feedback on it. And then that kind of information could be summarized and relayed to that person.
And Eric, I think you're right that in listening sessions with the board, many times you're going to need to come back to me or to administration, someone around the table, to get more information or get the answers.
Correct.
And then when we talk about governance versus management, then we also know then the board members begin to get into, we want to make sure that you stay in that governance lane.
And that's what I'm concerned about with the listening sessions, is not only,
Right.
not being prepared for something like Eric said, but also if you're doing an engagement rather than a listening, you could be, depending on what board members are there that day, getting different responses in that engagement.
I will say that during those, Keith was there and usually another assistant superintendent. The board generally didn't answer the questions. I will say that it generally was
Yeah, and I think that's
somebody else answering the question and the board. I mean, I think one of them was the teacher negotiation. The teachers wanted to talk to the board members, but you couldn't really say much because it's negotiations. So it was more, they just wanted to listen to us and we said, oh, I understand, and those kinds of things. But again, there were more people at the table. It wasn't just the board. But I do like Eric's idea because then we can gauge, and if we're not getting a lot of people that actually want responses, then there's really not a.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I will say, I'm not super worried. I mean, to your point, then, I'm not super worried about not knowing anything because I don't know that we would ever show up without
Right.
someone more knowledgeable in the day-to-day details, right? But what I do like about them is that it's a signal of openness and transparency and trying to do something different that maybe we haven't tried recently, or, you know, maybe the last time we tried it, it didn't work, but maybe we're going to try something different now. Just because, you know, whenever the last time it is we try that, like, I'm sure the community is different, the makeup is different, we've got, you know, like, we've grown a lot, you know, and so there may just be, we may just need to pursue different avenues to make sure that we are truly being accessible to people the way that they want us to be accessible. I mean, honestly, I do think actually the main issue is that, like, our meetings start at 6 and I mean, you've all seen me, like, run in here at 5:59 with my feet on fire. Like, I think the 5:30 gets hard for people who are employed, right? But that being said, you know, if you know, okay, these 3 times I have to be here at 5:30, these 2 times over the course of the year, then so be it, you know?
Right.
Well, and as a reminder, prior to public comment, the board chair, whoever, in that little statement, it is that the superintendent may be requested to have a response to you. And so that's always been an option. And oftentimes, I will say, when things are heard, somebody in executive cabinet or administration does respond to staff or to the person speaking, sorry. Because we have their name, we have their email on the sign-up form.
Yeah. I just think maybe putting it on when they sign up, like to Eric's point, like, would you like a response after your comment? Gives them then, we know, do they want somebody to follow up, or are they just here because they want their voice heard and then they never want to hear anything again from us?
Or you could just ask after each person.
Yeah, I could.
If I may too, so a lot of times
That works.
when people do comment, you'll see me follow them out.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'm asking them that question. Did you want us to come with a response for you, or did you got stopped by the buzzer? Could you share with me what your full comments were so that you all had contact information and things like that? The other one thing I'd say, and I've seen this done well in one space, what happens sometimes though is only 3 people show up, and then the other board members may not know what was discussed. And so sometimes what I've seen is that you have to somehow find a way to summarize that for the rest of the board. And, because so that's, I mean, there might be a process there that you want to consider, because if only 2 or 3 of you are here for this listening session, you would want the whole board to be aware that this was happening with the community. And so what might that reporting system look like too?
Okay. And I can definitely just ask after each person, would you like a follow-up phone call or email? Until Dana said, why don't we just ask him?
Yeah, I mean, and Dana does send us stuff, like last week, the person that did the public comment that couldn't finish,
Right.
she was buzzed off, you sent us a report. Right. And I know Mr. Smokovich followed up with her as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have a plan for that one. So then there's the staff listening sessions. I know we did these a while ago. Went to every school, and anybody could come in. We did some in the morning, we did some after school to try and accommodate. I wouldn't say that they were well attended. I would say, I know I went to almost all the middle schools, and as you know, middle schools have quite a few staff, and I think the most we had was maybe 12 people. So that's what, not even 10% of the staff. I think again, if we were doing something like boundary changes or things that it's going to affect a particular school more than another, that might be when we would want to go out and listen. Or if there's a program that we're considering that we might have to eliminate, but I think Julie and them are already doing
I think again, we
that.
want to just be really careful about getting into the management.
Yeah, I feel like staff listening sessions get us much more, I like, compared to community listening sessions, I feel like staff listening sessions were much more at risk of getting into management. And as I learned in my thing at NSBA, boards that engage in management have worse student outcomes, so we can't do that. I paid attention in that.
And I think, I would just say, I think that back however many years ago, I think the culture and climate of the school district may have been different. Perhaps it warranted that. I feel like right now, the executive cabinet members we have, our lead principals, we are always out in schools. We're always listening to what our staff has to say. I don't know right now if you went out there that we would be surprised by anything that's said. I think people, as leaders, we're keeping a pretty good pulse on what's happening throughout the district. And hopefully that's reflected in what you hear from people who work in the district.
And I would also say, Katie, actually, when you talked about 12 people showing up from the middle school, like anything much bigger than that is really unwieldy. Like, I don't know how you could structure something, right? So you want everyone to show up, but then how do you have everyone show up in a way that isn't a waste of time for them, but also results in like meaningful feedback being provided? I mean, I think it gets much more, I think we would need like a much more robust process.
And I think it came about because there was comments about board members not being like accessible, like we weren't. That was a time where we were getting a lot of emails, and most of our responses were "thank you, we'll consider your comment" type of thing, because you would be getting so many of them. And I don't think we've had anything coming up that has cause those. So, so do we want those just removed then off of Okay. So that would be removed.
Sharon, do you have any
Anything else?
point? Like, you've been very silent, and that's
Sharon's
very
tired.
unlike you.
Yep.
We've been having them, people come with hidden agendas. We've had security, and the climate and culture that we're in right now, it's a risky business, believe me.
Yeah.
And what Katie said, and of course, Cindy, why not?
Right.
And they go back and say, you said something you didn't even say?
Right.
Oh, no, then we're really, we're creating more problems for ourselves. We're trying to stay away from that. So, Katie, if they get up there and start talking, I think if you acknowledge and say, yes, we heard you, and we'll ask the superintendent to respond to you, I think that's gone far enough.
Okay.
There you go, now I'm woke, okay?
Okay, so then we also had all the ones in red that were from this last school year that were completed. Are there any comments, questions on any of those?
We do the Sharon.
Yes, yes, we do have the mentoring program.
Do we do the intercultural development this year? We did not, correct?
Not yet.
But we did do, the excellence in governance is what we did like in January, February, right? Yeah, okay. Now I don't remember what
Which one?
Which one is it?
when I'm saying work session versus business meeting, monitoring versus action items, like using the budget as an example. So if the budget is an example, then it feels like something I said, but now I don't remember what I meant when I said it.
Oh, that was having work sessions be like this and
okay.
where we just
Okay.
vote.
Where we just vote over there.
Essentially
Okay.
just vote at the business meetings.
Okay.
What you're going to see next with Chris.
So is anybody else have anything, or are we good to move forward? Did you need anything else from us? No. Okay. We will move on to 5.0, information items, and 5.1 is the financial update, and that is presented by Chris Blackburn, Director of Business Services.
Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to thank you, and that was a lot of good discussion, and I think last time I got us back on schedule, so we'll see what I can do tonight. So Sean did take over my clicking duties. I was a little nervous that I had to talk, hold the microphone, and click and read, and I was like, oh my goodness, this might be a little nerve-wracking tonight. So this evening, we're going to talk about how we do our forecast for our budget. At this point in the year, we're wrapping up our final fiscal year of last year, getting prepared for our audit, which will begin on this coming Monday, that they'll be on site for our final field work. We have joked that they're going to move into our offices for about 3 weeks. So if you don't see me or hear from me, or I look a little frazzled, just know that that's because they're keeping us hopping. So once that's done, then we'll have the results of our audit typically presented in January. And so it's just kind of a nice time of year to reflect on our forecasting and how we do that. And again, we're always monitoring what's going to happen in the future and trying to, read the magic 8 ball, so to speak. So as we looked in, the purpose of really why we do budget forecasting is to estimate our future fund balances, is one of the primary reasons. And as we've noted in the past, fund balances are really our district's checkbook. What do we have kind of in savings that we're able to spend in years following? It is monitored by the Minnesota Department of Education, and board policy recently updated in the last few years is 16.6% is the goal by fiscal year 27. The other reason why we do budget forecasts is to estimate any needed adjustments to our budget and to just kind of assess where we're at and see, are we on track? Do we need to make some modifications? Similar to what you do in your own household budget. We do work with totals, and again, there's a significant number of assumptions as we look forward. Again, It's always a moving target a little bit as to, perhaps where contracts are settled, perhaps where the state sets legislatively priorities or funding sources that maybe we didn't anticipate. And so it's kind of always a work in progress. And so the fund balance right now is based on the best information we have today. So again, we always say that, the one thing we kind of guarantee about budget is it's wrong, but we do the very best we can at that moment, but it is a snapshot in time at that given moment. On the next slide, then we start talking about assumptions that we utilize in our forecasting. And so the biggest assumption, of course, or one of the biggest assumptions is regarding enrollment. And CFAC, I know we talk a lot about it as well, but we tend to be very conservative here at the district and have for many years. We know that that just has significant impacts if we kind of overshoot and come in below. So we right now show very slight overall increase to enrollment over the next 5 years. Again, we utilize the cohort survival method. We like to stay conservative. It's about a 0.8% over the next 5 years, so real slow growth. Again, as indicated in the demographic study we had recently, that's consistent with that, and it equates to about 13 students a year. Factors that can also impact enrollment are, again, the kindergarten, and we know with that historically low birth rates, that will have impact as we kind of get smaller class sizes in than we've seen in past history. Post-secondary enrollment options, which again is our options, particularly our 10th or some 10th, but predominantly our 11th and 12th graders can make to attend post-secondary college enrollment options while yet in high school. Other enrollment options through other school choices, and then if we do have students who drop classes or in the community. So again, the reason we stay conservative is we come in under, we have a little, or we have come in more students than we anticipate. That's always good news. Then we have a little additional revenue, but if we come in below at this point in the year, there's just no good way to adjust our spending. I got it. Apparently I just talked too slow. On the next slide then is our budget enrollment. It is shown on that previous slide as we through 22 and 23 is actual, so in the red bars. The green right now, again, we're wrapping up 24, and so our most recent kind of anticipation was 18,924. Right now we're trending higher in 24-25, but I will caution the board that historically we've trended higher in September, and then we tend to go downward throughout the year. So certainly that's positive. I have peers who are maybe not in that situation even at this point this year, so that's positive. As we look forward in the gray bars then, again, that's projections out through 2030, and again, that real flat growth, which will have some impacts as it just slows down that revenue growth as well. On the next slide, it's just that state data again regarding births. They issue them by county, the state does, and so we utilize that data for this, particularly in Washington County. We know on historical trends how many students that were born that then we capture into our kindergarten classes. And again, as we look forward, you can see that we're trending about 46.3% of those births. The 21 data isn't out yet, so we're not quite certain beyond 26 what that may look like. So we had to make some assumptions on that. Our district is a kind of a reminder that we do have our population. We are entirely in Washington County, and our district population of that is about 42%. So we do capture more of the student population, which is positive. So on this slide is really busy, and so don't hurt your eyes looking at it. CFAC is often seen it and blown up sometimes, but we do utilize, just a reminder, the cohort survival method between each grade. And so what that involves is students who are in first grade, how many of those students move to second grade, and similarly, second grade to third grade. As an example, as we look, sometimes we see drops in students, so there might be a change and it might be a decrease. Sometimes that's particularly if you look at like 10th grade into 11th grade, often that PSEO comes into impact. We'll also have grade levels where we see increases predominantly, where maybe it's a greater than 100% capture rate, and quite often that's a result of perhaps student enrollment choices at other schools that have stopped at that grade level, and so they don't proceed beyond perhaps like a 5th grade level, and so we capture additional students in grade 6. So again, this is a historical trend over 10 years, and so we use that data to project then out through 2030. And so again, just that reminder, you'll see one drop in 27, just kind of roughly anticipated at this point, or real slight, but it is overall a 0.8 increase in those years following. And I just put on there so that revenue, if we maintained all the students we currently have, it would be almost $5.5 million. But as I am also super conservative, I would anticipate that number will be significantly lower as we look towards spring. But we certainly hope to maintain that those students as well. We know that this year there's a post-secondary enrollment option window for, usually it was just spring for fall term, and then for the whole year, and now there is a mid-year option as well. So we're anticipating possibly some impact from that. On the next slide then, revenue assumptions. Most of our state aid is derived from the basic formula, and so the formula increases definitely are the biggest driver of most of our revenue changes. The basic formula for 24-25, as a reminder, was $7,281 per pupil unit, and we do use adjusted pupil units, so again, that secondary weighted a little bit higher. The formula increased to 2% as we're in this current year, and future years by state statute are tied to inflation. And I'll kind of air quote a little bit on inflation because they did set a minimum and maximum of 2% and 3%. The state could certainly come in and say we would like to provide schools with additional state aid, and they could revise that formula, but at this time it's tied to that. As we looked then and forecast our assumptions, we did 2.5%, and that was largely a factor of, as we looked at the CPI rate they used for the inflation factor on our referendum dollars. That's what they were kind of projecting out, as well as in levy forecasts. Other revenue assumptions then, as we forecast out, we assume our federal dollars, both title, special education, and other funds, would stay flat, and that's what we've historically seen outside of the pandemic funding era. Fees and other collections for admissions and such like that, we also assume those stay relatively flat year to year. State special education, we do anticipate increasing, but that's because our expenditures increase, and it is based on correlates kind of as a percentage of our expenditures. And again, that operating referendum that we were fortunate to receive does increase with inflation, as that's what the voters had approved. On the cash outside, expenditure assumptions, wages and benefits are all negotiated. And so that is by far the biggest driver. Between 75 and 80% on any given year of our budget is wages and benefits across the board. I do have to fully admit that I have one typo, and we have 10 unions. I was like, oh, bummer, we used to have a separate pre-K, if you recall, a number of years ago. So I was updating this, and all of a sudden I thought, oh, and I'd already sent it to Sean, so it ended up with 11. But we do have 10 unions. 8 of those are in the general fund. Often they cross, but there's 2 that are nutrition services, and our kids club supervisors are in other funds outside of general fund. With the wages and benefits, then, we see percentage of salaries and wages as a cost of living adjustment. So when we do negotiations, often there's a factor that's increased kind of overall. And then additionally, even in non-negotiating years, there's steps in most contracts that you'll maybe start at a step 1, and next year you'll go to a step 2. Some contracts have longevity instead, which is very similar. It's just sometimes stretched directly tied to years of service, where steps aren't always tied to years of service. In the teacher contract, in addition to the steps, they do have lanes, and as just a reminder, that's if they continue on in that education, that they can go up steps, as well as a incentive to have those perhaps obtain a master's or additional credits beyond a bachelor's. Generally, all of our negotiated contracts are 2-year agreements, and then we have to always remind ourselves too, and keep in mind that when we raise the wages and benefits, our payroll taxes as well need to increase. Additional expenditure assumptions, then, we did do, in the forecast, we did a 2% average on the rest of these, and that includes utility and fuel costs, professional services, so if we contract our SRO, our any special education services that we may need that we have to contract for, substitute teachers and paras as an additional, snow removal. Last year was a good year. Keep your fingers crossed for another good year. Waste removal. any other utilities, textbooks, instructional supplies, general and repair supplies. And so we always say it's everything from the lights on to the, books in a kid's classroom, that's all in that other. So we do assume a 2% just on average increase in those. Some miscellaneous expenditure assumptions then, some things that do help us slightly. We do see approximately 30 retirements each year. And as you can imagine, we do have some savings between maybe no matter which category of employee, right, that we do have some net savings to their funds, because often we're bringing somebody in that's not as experienced. And so we, on average, save about $50,000 fully inclusive of benefits per staff retirement, and again, about 30 a year. So that's reflected in our forecast. We also realize that staffing would need to increase with increased enrollment. So as we project out too, sometimes we know that there may be, as we're expanding at Eastridge and Altman, we recognize that they will have additional staffing needs are likely. We also know that with new buildings and rentals as well, that we may have additional costs in those. So the meat and potatoes part of tonight's presentation, the projected revenues and forecast, but as we look, we see the revenues creeping slow, going up as well, but the expenditures are creeping up as well, and they're kind of outpacing that revenue amount. Largely, that's due to that basic formula that we know hasn't historically kept up with inflation, and that is the biggest chunk of our revenue that we receive. It also doesn't align with the rate at which we've needed to settle contracts and make those mindful investments in staff. The next slide then is we have all the revenue and expenditure information. We can take that and project our fund balance. And so, again, just a reminder, this is one snapshot in time. I did look at the similar presentation from last year, and this is kind of on similar track a little bit. So as we look, it's, again, 23-24 is not fully done yet, but we do anticipate approaching, if not possibly exceeding 13% this year, so that's positive. Next year, as you know, we did approve a $5 million budget deficit, and so we do anticipate a slight decline in fund balance next year. And then as we look to future years, right now, there's just a structural imbalance, again, with the erosion of fund balance as expenditures continue to outpace those revenues without absent any significant changes to state funding or, adjustments on our behalf as well. And so certainly, on any given year, we absolutely are continuing to look for any efficiencies. Are there maybe positions that were open that perhaps we don't need to be filled? Are there resources maybe that are underutilized and we can consider, do we really need that resource any longer? Are there just maybe some purchases that we can defer that maybe aren't necessarily, as we really look, is it most beneficial to our students, right? And are we making that with the focus of our decision making, of course? So with that, any questions?
Anyone have any questions?
I wish I did. Yes.
Okay.
I'll take that as a compliment, so thank you.
I'll just start out with a question, a comment. I think we talk about the transition from Dan to Chris, and what I love about it is we remain conservative. I believe we remain conservative because we have really kept the pulse on taking a look at the budget all the time. Enrollment is an every week conversation. We know that that's where the basis of our money comes. And also making sure that every year we have a process in place that we're always looking for ways to refine what we do. And I think that ability to live within our means, we know that we went out to the community in 2021, and we don't want to be that school district that goes out every year. In light of the inflation factor onto those referendum dollars, that certainly has been helpful. I think I shared with a couple of you today that, when I hear some of my superintendent colleagues talking about $27 million worth of reductions, right now we're in a different spot, but we do know that by deficit spending $5 million one year equals $8 million the next, and pretty soon the fund balance is gone. And so we will continue to work hard on the other side to make sure that we hold the line as much as possible, knowing that needs come up and things that we do have to fund to take care of kids. But thank you, and Chris and her team, this is a busy week ahead. I think until I've gotten into this role, I really didn't understand the work of finance. I really did think they were a money tree, and you asked and you received. But I realized it's so much more than that. And talking with Chris and, of course, working with Dan for many years, truly, finishing up last year's budget, you're in this budget now, and now you're also looking ahead. So at any given point in time, you're working on 3 different budget years. I can't always keep the FY 25, 24 straight. I have to like go back in my mind, like, what year was that? But Chris and your team, thank you, because I know you have a tough week ahead.
Thank you.
Not because we did anything wrong, just because they're going to want a lot of information.
It perhaps pays to have been an auditor at one point in my career, so, but thank you.
Okay, on to 5.2, and that is the first reading of proposed policy changes presented by Julie Nielsen, Superintendent.
Thank you. This evening, I'm bringing forward 5 policies, and part of your board governance plan, you saw that we are reviewing a third of those policies every year. We continue that pattern. So first up, 510.1, athletic and activity participation. What you're going to note in that particular policy are some additions to the participation and guidelines. No significant changes, just additional clarity. Policy 522, Title IX, non-discrimination. I've talked with some board members, and I know there were some conversations. This is a very scaled back version of our Title IX policy. We would anticipate there are some federal cases out there right now around Title IX, and so we would anticipate there may be some adjustments. This particular policy at this time with this language, working with our attorney, he did share that this policy has the same level of protection as we would underneath Minnesota law, which is the Minnesota Human Rights Act, or MHR, in relationship to discrimination. So this is a very tight policy with our primary coordinator around Title IX being Abby Baker. The next 3 policies, 801.1, 801.2, and 801.3, I'm amazed after going through at least a third of the policies that we keep finding policies that really we don't need to have. So 801.1, site acquisition procedures. I think the board is all aware. Number 1, in the policy language, it already says it's a procedure. And we know that it's a procedure because we've gone out and looked at sites. So we would recommend removing that. Naming of district facilities. Outside of it not having the word procedures in the title, basically, if you look at the purpose, there is a procedure, and the procedure is you work through the superintendent. And so we would also recommend that the naming of the district facility would go along with any additional building that would be led then by the superintendent. And finally, 801.3, retirement of facilities. I think that you're aware through some of our past work that anytime we talk about repurposing or closing a school, that there is a statute in place there. So with that one as well, we would be recommending removing that. And for those 3, there are no MSBA model policies. So they are not required by MSBA, so we would recommend removal of those 3 policies.
Any questions on any of those? No? Any public comment on any of those? Okay. We will move on to 6.0, reports and comments. First one, Superintendent.
You know, I almost forgot that I had to make some comments tonight. What's happened to me? It's only October, and I'm forgetting. Well, let me start by saying next week is our MEA week, which means students will not be in school on Thursday and Friday, and Wednesday is a little bit of an adjusted day for our elementary students. As well as I talked with the board, I know we have gotten some calls around next year's calendar. We will be bringing forward a calendar for the 25-26 school year next year. In November for next year, thank you. With just a little caveat, because we're working through some construction, and I know I talked with board members today, we want to make sure that our families in our community know what our calendar is proposed to look like, so we will be asking for approval at our second meeting in November. But we also have the next couple of months going through some construction and thinking about if we need to make any adjustments to our school district calendar. So just, I share that now, and also that graduation dates have been set. Thank you to Christine Schaefer, our high school principals. It really has we have gotten to the point as a school district that we have outgrown Aldrich Arena. It just no longer meets the needs of the district. I know, Sharon, you're surprised, I can tell. But I think the other side of that is anytime there's change, whatever that change be, even if it be a positive change where you can bring as many guests, it's a change nonetheless. And so that means different things for different families who have had a different experience. We are really excited to host graduation at Mariucci Arena, but we also know that when you're the last one in, you're not going to get prime time. And so we just have to be a little patient. We have a number of other metro school districts who host graduations on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays, 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. It's not unusual, but we know based on our experience that many times it's more celebratory, if you will, to have it on a Friday night, a Saturday, or a Sunday. And so we're going to make this work. We are excited about it. We think the kids will be excited about it, and we hope that families will be able to join us in Minneapolis for that. So those dates have been communicated out already in times and have been finalized with Mariucci Arena. And Sharon is happy. And with that, I will just close. I was out at Liberty Ridge today. They had a little read and feed, and I just have forgotten how darn cute those elementary kids are. The first kid, when we walked into the cafeteria, poked the principal in the stomach. Mr. Moore, Mr. Moore. And there were like 4 other kids who were wrapping their arms around them with pizza on their mouth. And I thought, no, this is what I love about those little elementary kids. But so with that read and feed, we had high school football players there reading to the kids. Well, I just want you to know that the reading turned into a little bit of arm wrestling, and I saw some other shenanigans going on with the football players. But nonetheless, the kids loved having our high schoolers at our elementary school. So thank you.
Okay, any board members have any upcoming events on any of their committees that they'd like to share? Okay, hearing none. 7.0, future meeting dates, October 24th, 2024, school board business meeting here at 6 p.m. November 7th, 2024 is our school board workshop meeting, also here at 6 p.m. And with that, 8.0, we are adjourned.